Hi, my name's Dave Strabel, and this is Getting Started with Terraform and Azure Part 2. So if you watched Part 1, we learned how to authenticate Terraform into the Azure Resource Manager API. Now let's go through and actually create resources with Terraform. So in Terraform's documentation, you'll find the Microsoft Azure RM provider documents here. The documents are going to show you what data sources, what type of resources that you can create. And when you look at some of these resources, they're going to give you example usage, any type of arguments that you may put in into the resource, and also attributes that it's going to export. So if we go back over to our Terraform files here, our main TF is where we're actually going to store all our resources. And our resources here, we're going to start with the resource group. Within Azure, you have a resource group that's going to contain all the components and resources for your application. So this Azure RM resource group, we name this TF-prod.gs, which that name's just going to be used for Terraform to refer to. Our actual name of the resource group is TF-prod.rg. So once we have a resource group, we can start deploying our networks, our storage, our IP configurations, and virtual machines. So here I have an Azure Virtual Network. We'll create that first. And we name our Azure Virtual Network. But you'll also see down here in this resource group name that this looks a little bit different than the other attributes. What this is actually doing, it's pulling this name for what we've set up here in this resource group. So it's saying use the Azure Resource Manager resource group and refer to this TF-prod.gs, which is right here. This is the name that we gave Terraform to refer to. And then also pull the attribute name. So it's going to set this Azure Virtual Network and put it into this TF-prod.rg resource group. And as we go down, you can see we're creating subnets. We're also creating those network interfaces. Sometimes you're going to have dependencies on here that you need to declare. So say for a network interface, we may need a virtual network first to create, or a IP configuration, we may need the subnet. So here, one of the things that we can do is also do a depends on, and then we'll do equal $, and then we'll actually declare what it's actually depending on. So here we may depend on the network interface, so we would just put in Azure RM network _ interface, and as you remember, we need to refer back to what we've defined for this network interface here. So it's TF-prod.gs is what we're going to use here. And now that we have that set, what that will actually do here is before this resource is created, it's actually going to make sure this network interface is created. So Terraform likes to kind of take things and deploy them in parallel when it can. So this will tell it not to do that, so we can get that network interface created and then bring up that IP interface. So now that we have multiple resources defined, you'll see we've got managed disk, our virtual machine, the type of storage image we're going to use here is going to be Ubuntu, and we're actually attaching some additional disks down here. As you can see, the storage data disk, the OS profile here. We're showing the OSO profile. This is going to be computer name. Give it an admin and password. Typically, you're not going to want to do this for security's sake. You're going to want to use this OS profile Linux config and set this to true, and then you can actually configure it with the SSH key. And then we also have some tags defined for our environment. So it's going to pick up these tag resources as environment demo here. So when we run Terraform, the first thing, once we create all our resources, we always want to run a plan. So when we run a Terraform plan, this is going to check, look at the state, see what resources that it needs to create, delete, modify. Here, as you can see, we have 0 changes and 0 to destroy, so we're just going to add these 6 resources. Once we've added those, once we've actually ran the Terraform plan, then we want to run a Terraform apply. The Terraform apply is going to go do the work. It's going to go deploy our virtual networks, our resource groups, and you'll see it kind of go through here. Usually it's going to take a minute or 2 to create that virtual machine. Other resources create a little faster, but you can see it's going through all those different resources we have. So why it does that, let's look back here. One thing to really, when you start getting started with Terraform and Azure, is really go through the documentation here on the Azure provider. This is going to give you a lot of information on what type of resources you can create. The one thing I would like to point out too, though, is if we go down to template resources here. The template resources, so Terraform can actually deploy if you've created an Azure Resource Manager template. So for example, let's say Terraform doesn't have a resource provider here for a specific Azure feature. You can actually use an Azure Resource Manager template deployment to actually deploy that with Terraform. I'll say use this sparingly. You really want to keep those resources that you're deploying with Terraform as provided resources that Terraform provides here. And you'll see a lot more added over time from Azure and Terraform. They'll be putting more of these resources in there, so you're not limited in which resources you can deploy through Terraform. All right, now that we have that, you'll see it's creating this virtual machine. This is where I said it'd probably take a couple minutes. But that's really about it for deploying resources. As you can see in our resource manager, though, what we'll cover in part 3 of this is actually going through how do you organize these different Terraform files, because if you have a larger environment, for example, like this is pretty small. We're just deploying some virtual networks and storage and virtual machines. But let's say you had a multi-tier application where you're going to have web front ends, you're going to have maybe data tiers. With all those data tiers, you're going to have different storage that you need to deploy. Putting all that in just one main file can get a little convoluted and hard to understand. So in part 3, we'll go through, understand some best practices with building out your folder structures and how to scaffold really a application for Terraform. Thanks for joining part 2 and look forward to joining part 3. Thank you.